have to have this discussion because it's all that the national media seems to want to talk about after rivalry. Got to have an Alabama discussion, Garrett, because as they throttle their in-state rival in the Iron Bowl, beat Auburn 49-27, all of a sudden, at least according to the national narrative, the door is seemingly cracked open for them to get into the playoff at 10-2 if there's a couple of conference championship upsets. So obviously they're not going to be ranked in the top 4 this week. I think it's very clear that the top 4 is going to be some combination of Michigan and Georgia at the top, followed by TCU and USC. That's very, very clear. But if two of those teams slip up, is there a possibility that Alabama gets in your mind?
Is there a possibility? Yeah, there's obviously a possibility because what this committee's shown is they're willing to put Bama in when they don't deserve it. And I'll go ahead and say it. They don't deserve it. They beat Auburn 49-27. Just a reminder, Auburn played well on the back part of the season, but they don't have a real head coach. They were a bad team this year, right? They played well for Cadillac Williams. They definitely had a lot of energy, but you go on the road to Tuscaloosa, you lose a game at that level. That's just what's going to happen when you have a much better coach on the other side. And to be clear, Nick Saban is still one of the best coaches in college football. That being said, they're 10-2. They maybe shouldn't even be where they are because their 2 is worse than Tennessee's 2 and worse than LSU's 2 right now. And those are the two teams that did beat them. So I don't even know if they're in the right pecking order in terms of SEC teams. Now, obviously, LSU, they picked up their loss against A&M, but we're going to pretend that Tennessee didn't finish and beat them. So, man, I don't know. I don't see how Alabama should get in. And I'm not trying to, be that guy, but if anyone's going to get in that doesn't play for a conference championship, wouldn't it be Ohio State? Because their only loss would be to then either number 1 or number 2 Michigan. I think it should be number 1, but that's also kind of part of Bama's problem. So Bama's problem is if you're Ohio State, you can make the case that, well, it's not necessarily what you did when you played them, it's who they ended up as. The issue there is, Alabama kind of has to go both ways because they either want to say it was Tennessee when they played them or LSU towards the end of the season. They can't really pick and choose and have it both ways. I just don't see why Alabama deserves it. I see why they might get in because they're Alabama, right? They come with the name brand. They're supposed to be in the playoffs, but I still think I would take a 2-loss appeared in a conference championship game USC or a 1-loss TCU who made it to their conference championship game before I would take Alabama. Now, would I mix up the seeding? Sure, I'd put TCU at 4 in that case, but I still think I'd let either of them in before Alabama. And so we're going to see if they're going to break their little 2-loss rule to get Bama in. I don't think that they should. And if Alabama does get in, I totally get why people complain about SEC bias. That is the biggest case of SEC bias I will have ever seen if Alabama makes it in after just kind of a ho-hum into the year. It's they play well. They're Alabama. Congratulations. You went 10-2. That's good. Go play in the Sugar Bowl or something. I don't know. And so, it'll be really interesting to see what the committee wants to do. I don't think they deserve a spot.
I'm with you. I don't think any of the 2 loss teams or potential 2 loss teams, if you consider USC, would deserve a spot. I don't think Alabama has a path. I think it's going to be some combination of the current top 5. I think you'll see the top 5 on Tuesday night be Michigan, Georgia, TCU, USC, and Ohio State. Maybe
Yeah, that
not
should be right.
necessarily in that order. I think the first 4 will be in the top 4 in some order. Ohio State will be number 5, and everybody's going to lose their minds when Alabama comes in at number 6, which
Yep,
is going to happen.
it's
And
going to
everybody's going
happen.
to lose their mind and talk about how does Alabama have a path to the playoff? They don't. It's the top 5, and USC. If there's multiple losses in the top 4, USC is going to be the odd one out. I personally think because of everything that's happened, Georgia, Michigan, and TCU are all safe this week,
I
regardless of
think
what
so,
happens.
yeah.
I think TCU is safe. I think going 12-0 in the regular season, playing against the team that they've already beaten, I think they won't necessarily have, anything held against them. Now, if they're the only one that loses, then they're leaving it up to chance a little bit. And Ohio
Mhm.
State could sneak in and take that 4 spot. But personally, Michigan and Georgia are 100% safe. I'd put TCU at about 80 to 90% safe. And then we're just looking at, does USC take care of Utah? And if USC and TCU both lose, I think TCU goes in at 4 or goes in at 4 and Ohio State jumps up to 3 personally. But it's semantics at this point. The bottom line when we're talking about Alabama, I don't think they have a path. If they were somehow to sneak in, or even with just the possibility of people talking about them getting in this season, for you personally, does that give you more or less reason for a 12-team playoff?
Personally, that gives me more reason because if you're just going to put Alabama in, then just go to 12 and give the teams that actually deserve it a shot too. Because let's face it, Bama coming with the name brand, they're going to be in that top 12 probably every single year until Nick Saban retires or falls over coaching a game.
They're
And
too
I wouldn't
talented to
wish
not.
that on him.
They're too
They're too
talented to not
talented
be
to
in the
not.
top 12.
Yeah. And, even on years where they've lost these two and you would consider putting in like a Tennessee or a LSU ahead of them, they still probably squeak in at 11 or 12, right? You have a really hard time convincing me that there are 12 teams better than Alabama every single year. That being said, if you're just going to put them in and you're just going to let them inflate the ranking and do that, then go ahead and give these other teams that deserve it a shot. Give the USC, who might lose next week, or even the Utah, who made it to their conference championship game and are playing a lot better in the last part of the year. Just throttled Colorado, which I know it's Colorado, but they throttled them. You know, give some of these teams that are playing better towards the end of the year, that maybe have a better resume. Maybe their resume doesn't look as good because they didn't beat teams that are called, Ole Miss or A&M or LSU, right? That doesn't necessarily mean as much if you look at just the numbers, right? TCU, as of a couple of weeks ago, they had the hardest strength of record. I don't know if that's still true for them, but as of a couple weeks ago, had the hardest strength of record, and we were acting like their schedule was weak. That's pathetic, right? That's terrible that we wouldn't actually look at the numbers, look at how the teams play on a year-to-year basis, and then say, oh, well, this year maybe the Big 12 is playing slightly better football than the SEC West. Or, hey, maybe this year, if you're the champion of, the Big 10, then you deserve to be the number one seed instead of Georgia because, what was the SEC this year? And so I think that there is a little bit of that SEC bias going on right now. And I think that, it's hard to say as a fan of an SEC team because we obviously watch what happens on a week in, week out basis. But there's good football being played across this country, and we have to acknowledge it when that's happening. And when the other teams, especially under NIL, are playing a lot better with better talent and better players of those programs. So I just don't see how Bama has a real path. And if they do end up getting in for some reason, I want whoever they get in against to just beat the tar out of them in the first round.
I totally agree. And Bama even being considered as a possibility this year makes me just point to the need for a 12-team playoff. Because if you're
Absolutely.
going to let them in anyways in a 4-team playoff, or if there's even a remote possibility, make them go on the road. Like make them
Yeah,
face off against a team because they wouldn't be in the top 4. They wouldn't get a bye, and it's in the proposed 12-team system.
sure.
They would at the very least have to host a top 12 team and probably go on the road to a top 12 team. So expand this thing. Teams every year, teams 5 through 12 are really pretty interchangeable. And one of them could get hot at the right time. I know that people don't like hearing that. I know there's a staunch defense and probably people that want to go back to the original bowl system where we didn't even have a true national championship game. But to me, years like this show you that you need a 12-team playoff. And next week is going to show you why you would want a 12-team playoff because there's going to be one, maybe two games that actually matter next week.
Yeah.
And if USC loses on Friday night, all of a sudden there are no games that matter on Saturday.
Hmm.
Like other than Tulane and Cincinnati or Tulane and UCF fighting for who goes to the Cotton Bowl, there are no games that matter because it doesn't matter if all 4 or all 3 of the other top 3 lose. They're not falling out of the playoff. Like
Yeah.
they're not falling out of the playoff picture. So we need a 12-team playoff that would instantly give meaning to every game this Saturday instead of one, maybe two.
Gracious him. How about that?